This lecture, which is going to cover two really important enterprise feature of RDS, relational database, which is multi-AZ and read replicas. So we'll start off with the what is multi-AZ and then go on to what is read replica. And finally we'll have a comparison of the two and talk about when you would use each of these features. So let's begin with the multi-AZ. So what is multi-AZ? Well, it's an exact copy of your production database in another availability zone. So imagine you are running an application on some EC2 instances behind an elastic load balancer, and they are storing that data on RDS database with multi-AZ enabled. So with multi-AZ we have a primary RDS instances, and in this example our primary is located in US East 1A, and we have all standby or secondary RDS instances located in a different availability zone, that is US East 1B, and RDS will replicate that data from the primary instances to the standby. Now under normal circumstances, with everything operating as expected, the standby RDS instances is not visible or accessible to the application servers. But if something goes wrong with our primary databases instances, it could be there's a hardware issue or even a problem with the entire availability zones. We still have another database instances in the standby location, and RDS will automatically fail over to the standby database instances. So we have not lost our database. So with multi-AZ, AWS have done all the heavy lifting for you, and AWS handles all the replication between the primary and secondary, so you don't have to configure anything yourself. And when you write to your production database, the write will automatically synchronize to the standby databases. Okay, so and you might be wondering which type of RDS database can be configured as multi-AZ. Well, it's basically all of them. So that includes SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL, PostgreSQL, and MariaDB as well. So the main purpose with multi-AZ is to provide resilience and keep your application up and running. If you experience an unplanned failure, or if you're performing maintenance on your primary RDS instances, and in the event of an unplanned failure, RDS will automatically fail over to the standby, so that database operation can resume quickly without any administrative intervention. So it will automatically fail over to the secondary instance, and your application can keep on running. And it's really important to understand that multi-AZ is for disaster recovery. So it's for disaster recovery, and it is not for scaling out and improving performance. So that means that you cannot do this. So you cannot have your database client or your application server connecting to both the primary and standby simultaneously. And you might be thinking, if you multi-AZ can't be used for improving performance, then what can I use to improve performance? And that's a good question, because the main things can do to improve a performance, and particularly read performance, is to add the read replicas. And a read replica is a read-only copy of a primary database. So imagine you have got a couple of application server, and they are reading and writing data to an RDS instances, and you have also got a business intelligence applications. Well, in this, and this application need to access the same data, but if it only needs to read the data, so maybe your sales team needs to run reports and forecast using the data, but they don't need to write to the database, they only need to read access. Well, this is a really good use case for the read replicas, because you can add a read replica and it's a read only copy, but it will allow the sales team to run all your reports without using capacity on our primary database and without impacting our customer facing application in any way. So this is a great read heavy workload, because it takes a read load of your primary database, and a read replica can be loaded in the same availability zone as your primary database. It can also be a cross AZ, so located in a completely different availability zone, or it can even be cross region or located in a completely different region. And each read replica has its own DNS endpoint, which different and independent from the primary database. And so we have a one endpoint for the read replica and one for the primary database, and read replica can even be promoted to become their own independent databases. However, of course, if we do not do that, that's going to break the replication from the original database, but it will give us two completely independent database, both allowing read and write access. So with the read replicas, it is important to understand that these are used for scaling read performance, so they are primarily used for scaling and not for disaster recovery. And in order to configure a read replica, you will need to have automatic backups enabled. And automatic backup, of course, they are enabled by default, but if for some reason you have disabled backups, then you won't be able to deploy a read replica. And I don't know this for certain, but I suspect that behind the scenes, when RDS is setting up the read replica for the very first time, it's probably using automatic backup somewhere within the setup process. And multiple read replicas are supported for MySQL, MariaDB, PostgreSQL, and Oracle and SQL Server. They all allow you to add up to a 5 read replicas to each database instance. So let's move on my exam tips for multi-AZ and read replicas. So with multi-AZ, you can get an exact copy of your production database in another availability zone. It's used for disaster recovery and the event of a failure. RDS audience will automatically fail over to the standby instances, and where with the read replicas you get a read only copy of your primary database either in the same availability zone, in a different availability zone, or in a different region entirely. And read replicas are used to increase for or scale read performance. They are not used for disaster recovery, and they are great for read heavy workload because they take the load of your primary database. For the read only workload, for example business intelligence reporting jobs. So that is the end of this lecture. If you have any question, please let me know. Otherwise I will see you the next lecture. Thank you.